Hey guys, Steinixos here. So today, we'll be talking about the internal destruction problem. Now, before I even dive into what that means, I want to give you a heads up. This discussion is going to upset quite a few people, and that's because, by the very nature of this topic, I'm going to make the case that One Piece characters are far more powerful than most of you probably think. Now, for those of you who've been following my channel for a while, I'm sure this warning seems a little silly, because I've always argued that One Piece characters are far stronger than people generally give them credit for. But this time, it's different. This time, I'm about to do something a little sacrilegious in the power scaling community. That is, due to the nature of this topic, I'm going to be putting Metal Block level Luffy and the poster child of power scaling, Goku, in the same sentence. And I'm going to explain why, unironically, that the odds might actually be more in Luffy's favor than you realize. Now, with that out in the open, if you want to just tune out everything I'm about to say and go straight to the comments to call me biased, feel free. But for those of you who are interested in the discussion, let's dive into it. Now, as a prelude to this discussion, you need to understand that One Piece is a notoriously difficult series to properly power scale, and that's because Oda consistently goes in the opposite direction of the typical straightforward power scaling route. What do I mean by that? Well, for most people, destructive capacity, basically how big of an area a character can destroy, is the easiest way to gauge strength. That's why series like Dragon Ball are often seen as the gold standard in power scaling. Characters in Dragon Ball casually blow up planets. Even early on in the series, you had Piccolo casually destroy the moon. So even if someone knows nothing about power scaling, those kinds of feats make it really easy to associate a high level of strength with those characters. That's why you'll often hear casual fans say, there's no way One Piece characters could ever stand a chance against characters from something like Naruto. I mean, for example, just look at the Ten Tails Biju bomb. It's massive. Or take the Naruto movie where Toneri cuts the moon in half. There's simply no One Piece feat that reaches that kind of large-scale destruction. And this is exactly why some people look at Bajrangan and say, well, it's probably island level at best, simply because it's about the size of an island. Now, if you're someone who's not just a casual fan, and you've spent a bit more time in the power scaling community, then you're probably familiar with the concept of attack potency. That's the idea that an attack doesn't have to be large in area to be strong. If you're not familiar with that concept, by the way, I have a video explaining it. But once you understand that a small area of effect doesn't automatically mean low power, you've already cleared the first hurdle that most casual fans never get past. You start to realize, okay, maybe it's not that One Piece characters are weak. Maybe Oda just chooses to emphasize precision and attack potency over raw, flashy destruction. And we know this is true because even early in the series, Oda makes it clear through characters like Bon Clay that a powerful attack isn't just about causing wanton destruction. A truly strong technique is one with specific focus, something that destroys only what it's meant to. That's a core philosophy in One Piece. So good on you if you've made it to that level of understanding. But keep in mind, casual fans, who make up the vast majority of any fandom, don't get that. And because of that, about 95% of people will always default to thinking One Piece characters are weak until they see someone blow up a moon or a planet. But even if you do understand the concept of attack potency, there's still a problem, and that is, the most common way to scale attack potency is still through destructive feats. For example, because Piccolo destroyed the moon, anyone who can tank his attack must be at least moon level in durability, and anyone who can damage that person must have at least moon level attack potency. So even if you get that area of effect, doesn't necessarily tell us the full picture of the strength of a single attack or character. It still remains that destructive feats are still one of the main ways we scale characters to certain attack potency as a whole. So again, even on a more sophisticated level of analysis, it's not necessarily wrong when people say One Piece characters are weaker than Naruto characters, because One Piece just doesn't have those same high-end destructive showings. But here's where we get into an even more advanced level of power scaling, where we realize that destructive feats aren't the only way to scale attack potency. So, one of the other major tools is something called multipliers. Take Bleach for example. In that series, we're told directly that Bankai is a 5 to 10 times strength multiplier. So if someone is powerful in their base form, when they activate Bankai they get massively stronger. Take Kenpachi, who was able to cut through a meteor in Shikai form. That feat has been calculated to be around 113 exatons, or moon level. So, with Bankai being a 10 times multiplier, we know that Bankai Kenpachi reaches small planetary levels of attack potency, even if he never directly destroys a planet. And that's the power of multipliers. But of course, this is where Oda throws another wrench into everything, because unlike Bleach, where Bankai, which is one of the main power system, is given a clear multiplier by Kubo, Oda on the other hand is almost never that explicit. Take Haki for instance, one of One Piece's main power systems. It obviously scales with how strong a character is. And we have seen things like a completely ordinary arrow covered in Haki from a random side character is shattering rocks and the ground beneath it, making it obviously a significant multiplier. However, Oda never actually gives us a value. Even with something as crucial as Luffy's gears, Oda never outright tells us the multipliers. Now, if you've seen my video on how strong Gear 5 Luffy is, then you'll know there are tons of contextual clues that point towards specific minimum multiplier values. But again, because Oda doesn't hand us specific numbers, a lot of people just refuse to accept any values that get proposed, no matter how supported they are. And even when Oda does give us hard numbers, like with the energy steroids on Fishman Island, which double strength with each pill, people still somehow don't accept it. Take Hyuzu for example. Oda tells us he's scarfing down pills, and the anime literally shows him eating an entire plate of them, yet some fans refuse to believe he took more than 10 just because we weren't given an exact number. As a matter of fact, at the time of making this video, Versus Battle Wiki only credits Yuzu's attack potency and durability with taking only 2 pills. Like, let that sink in. His entire power up for that arc is based on that drug which has a clearly stated exponential multiplier, and we are told he was scarfing them down like soybeans in the manga, and we see him down a whole plate of them in the anime, so we unequivocally know he took quite a bit of them. But because Oda didn't say the exact number, in the over 10 years since Fishman's Island release, Versus Battle Wiki has only credited him with taking a measly 2 pills. And by the way, just in case you're wondering why I'm using Hyuzu as an example instead of Hody, it's because with Hyuzu, there's no indication he was abusing the drugs long term, so you can't argue tolerance or diminishing returns. He also wasn't injured before fighting Zoro, so you can't say part of the energy went into healing. He got the full effect of the steroids. And yet again, because of lack of exact figures, people just dismiss it. So you can see why it's a nightmare to properly scale One Piece. Not only because of the hostile environment created by detractors, but also because Oda himself chooses to focus more on attack potency than destructive capacity, and often avoids giving us the clear quantifiable data that fans in the power scaling community rely on. Now in Wano, Oda scaled up the difficulty of scaling dramatically, and in doing so, he made One Piece almost impossible to properly power scale. Why? Because he introduced something game-changing, Haki-based internal destruction techniques. You see, in Wano, Oda took his emphasis on effective attack potency to a whole new level. He introduced a refined version of Haki, where the energy doesn't just strike the outside of an opponent, it actually goes inside and destroys them from within. Now, this is a huge problem for power scaling, because as I've already said, it goes completely against our intuition. You see, if Luffy had to destroy a moon or a planet before he could damage Kaido, then everyone would instantly understand how strong Luffy had become and how insanely durable Kaido is. But instead, in classic Oda fashion, he goes in the opposite direction. He makes the visible area of effect even smaller by having the attack work internally. So when you see Luffy land something like Red Rock and finally hurt Kaido, yes, you can tell he's gotten stronger, because previously he couldn't hurt him at all. But you have no idea just how much stronger he's become. It's completely invisible. And this is especially frustrating, because this is one of the biggest power-ups Luffy has received in the entire series. And here's where things get even more complicated. This doesn't just affect Luffy, it impacts the entire verse from a scaling perspective. In fact, I'd argue that traditional power scaling language starts to break down entirely when we talk about this. I mean, there is a term that kind of helps conceptualize it, that is durability negation, but even that falls short. Most people think of durability negation as an all or nothing thing. Like take the Flash for example. He phases his hand into someone's head and pulls out their brain. That's durability negation, sure, but that's not what's happening with internal destruction Haki. It's not a clean removal of an organ. It's not instant death. What's happening is far more subtle. It's damage being done from the inside out. A better analogy analogy would be Chain Sumeragi from Kekai Sensen, who phases her hand into someone's chest and can crush their heart directly inside the body. That's much closer to what Luffy is doing with internal destruction haki. So when you saw Luffy hit Kaido in the head with Red Rock and Kaido actually felt it, if all you saw was a normal punch, then you missed the point entirely. Because in that moment, two really important things were happening. Firstly, most of Kaido's normal defenses were being bypassed. You see, usually when someone takes a punch, the outer body, skin, muscle, bone, armor, etc., absorbs the brunt of the impact. That's what protects the internal organs. But Luffy's attack bypassed all of that and went directly to Kaido's brain. Secondly, and this is key, internal organs are naturally much weaker than the external body. That's just basic anatomy. But there are two important reasons for this you need to understand. Firstly, as I explained in my equalization problem video, most power systems have a way to strengthen the body, but this usually only applies to the external body. Secondly, you simply can't train your internal organs the same way you train your skin, muscle, or bones, as for example explicitly explained in both Naruto and One Punch Man. So even someone insanely strong will likely have internal organs that are comparatively vulnerable. So again, not only is Luffy bypassing all of Kaido's natural and trained defenses, he's also hitting parts of Kaido that are inherently weaker, and it gets even crazier. Remember, you can stack internal destruction techniques. Kaido himself tells us that Luffy was combining Armament Haki internal destruction with Conqueror's Haki internal destruction. So, when Gear 5 Luffy punches Kaido in the head in his hybrid form, here's what's happening. Not only is the attack bypassing Kaido's external defense, like his thick dragon scales and any Haki armor, but it's directly hitting his brain, and not with just one internal punch. Conceptually, it's like Luffy is using two fists to directly hit Kaido's brain at the same time, one from the power of Armament Haki and another one from Conqueror's Haki. And we're not even including the effect of Gear 5, which lets Luffy stretch Kaido's body, weakening his durability even further. So once you understand everything we've talked about so far, maybe now you can start to see why I said in the intro that Luffy versus Goku isn't as one-sided as people tend to assume. Because remember, yes, Goku's internal organs are obviously way tougher than a regular human's, but they're not necessarily invincible. In fact, you could argue they're a lot more vulnerable than people realize. We've seen that when Goku isn't actively using ki to protect his body, even his obviously much stronger external body has been hurt by pretty ordinary things, like being scratched by a standard bullet and even completely pierced by what seems to be a regular laser gun. Which is in keeping with Whist's remark that without the external ki protection, even a Saiyan's body becomes much more fragile. So if Luffy can bypass Goku's external ki armor, then Goku might actually be in trouble, right? Now I know. Trust me, I know. This must feel completely blasphemous to hear someone unironically say out loud. Like, Luffy, the guy who can be beaten with a water gun, hurt multiversal Goku? Absurd. But again, think about it. Just like how, if Saiyans truly need oxygen to survive, as Vegeta himself implied, then if they run into someone who can manipulate the battlefield and remove oxygen, like Caesar Clown, they're suddenly in serious danger. Even if that person seems weaker overall, they can still win because they're exploiting a fundamental weakness. Now, I know many individuals are probably pretty triggered right now, so just to refocus, I need you to understand the main reason I'm discussing this topic isn't to argue that Luffy could beat Goku. That's a discussion that could be had, and maybe we will one day, but that's not really the point I'm interested in right now. The real reason I'm talking about this is to show you just how much traditional power scaling language completely breaks down when it comes to One Piece, especially when internal destruction haki is involved. And it's very important to understand this if you actually want to try scaling these characters properly. Like, to see what I mean, let's ask a seemingly simple question. How durable is Kaido really? Like, according to Versus Battle Wiki, Whole Cake Island Luffy is considered to be at least country level in attack potency. Now, if you've seen my video on how strong Gear 5 Luffy is, you already know that's a massive underestimation. But for the sake of this discussion, let's just accept it. So, a country-level Luffy could not even scratch a base form Kaido's external body. But then, with internal destruction Haki, Luffy is now bypassing Kaido's external defenses and hitting his brain directly, which obviously is much more vulnerable than his skin, muscles, and bones. That same country-level attack is now landing internally, without being cushioned by any external defense. So again, how durable is Kaido really? How do you even begin to quantify that? Now I get it, some of you might still be struggling to conceptualize this. I mean, we're talking about this invisible energy called Haki, flowing through skin and bone and damaging organs directly. It's a bit abstract. And I know some of you are probably thinking, well, at one point Luffy did say his punches were still too shallow, and maybe you take that to mean not all of the Haki is reaching the internal organs. So let's simplify it by switching examples. Let's talk about Law versus Big Mom. Because with Law, there's no guesswork. There's no need to imagine Haki flowing through tissue. He literally places his sword inside Big Mom's body. There's no outside in speculation. It's already inside. And from there, he activates Kroom and uses his sword to electrocute her organs directly from within. And according to Versus Battle Wiki, even Law's external attacks are moon level in attack potency. So now, Law is using that level of power inside Big Mom's body with all her external defenses completely bypassed. Her internal organs that are much weaker than skin or bone, are taking the full force of that attack directly. And again, even if we set aside all the technical power scaling talk, all the what level is this attack kind of stuff, and just look at what's literally happening on screen, you start to realize just how insane this interaction really is. Like, think about it. Law's attack completely shatters the ground beneath the island. It's not some light tap. It's an attack with so much force, it's warping the terrain. And yet, Big Mom's internal organs are taking that attack directly. No armor, no skin, no muscles, no bone to absorb the impact. Just raw force, hitting her from the inside. And what makes this even crazier is that right after that, she gets hit by Kid's strongest move, his electromagnetic railgun, right in the same general area, but this time from the outside, yet she's still somehow smiling and resisting his attack for some time. Again, let that sink in. Big Mom takes a devastating, direct organ targeting attack from inside her body, immediately followed by a high-level electromagnetic blast from the outside, but in the same spot, which would add even more damage to her organs, and yet she was still somehow enduring. So again, how do you even begin to quantify her durability? How do you compare her to characters in other series? Now by this point, I imagine most of you get the point. But just in case someone out there still doesn't fully understand the point I'm trying to bring across, let me give you probably the most clear example there is to give. That is, Luffy tanking Kizaru's explosion on Egghead. Like, really think about this. An explosion from Kizaru is not just some regular blast. It's on the level of a Biju bomb, or Deidara's C0 from Naruto. In fact, it's obviously stronger. Again, going off Versus Battle Wiki, Kizaru's attacks are considered moon level. Now imagine that level of explosion going off inside someone's body. That's what happened to Luffy. Like, be honest with yourself. Regardless of how strong you think Naruto or Sasuke is, if a Biju bomb, or Deidara's C0, or even just a regular nuclear bomb went off directly inside their stomach, would they survive? Obviously not. Almost no one in Naruto is surviving that. And even if you disagree with that part, that's fine. Because here's the actual point I want you to consider. Let's say Naruto, Sasuke, or whichever other character you want can survive a Biju bomb level explosion, but that explosion hits them from the outside, where they have their external body, their chakra cloak, their armor, whatever defenses they've trained and reinforced. Now compare that to Luffy, who is surviving a similarly powerful explosion from the inside, where all external defenses are bypassed, and the weakest parts of the body, his internal organs, are taking the full brunt of the blast directly. Should those two levels of durability really be placed in the same category? Obviously not. Even if the raw power of the explosion is the same, the context of the damage being withstood is totally different. And this is exactly what's happening with every single internal destruction Haki attack. You're seeing the punch, but you're not seeing what's actually happening underneath. And that's why One Piece is almost impossible to scale properly using conventional language. Now again, I just want to make something very clear. I'm not saying that One Piece characters are automatically stronger than and solo every other verse just because of the these internal destruction techniques. That's not the claim here. Like, take Garou for example, who used internal destruction attacks against Saitama, and Saitama obviously withstood them without issue. So obviously there are all kinds of exceptions and special workarounds depending on the verse. So again, this isn't about saying One Piece beats everything else. The main point of this video is to show that most scalers, including most One Piece scalers, are getting One Piece scaling completely wrong. These characters are operating on a level that's often way beyond how they're typically framed in the power scaling community. And that misunderstanding isn't necessarily because people aren't paying attention, it's because the language we're using to talk about these characters simply doesn't fit. And until that language evolves, until we start factoring in these nuances that Oda has foisted upon us, most people are just never going to grasp how powerful these characters actually are. And that's the core of the internal destruction problem. But anyway, that's the video guys. Let me know what you thought about it in the comment section down below. And of course, don't forget to like and subscribe. But anyway, see you guys next time.